Hey friends, welcome back to the Broken to Beloved podcast. I hope to provide practical resources through compassionate conversations to move toward healing and wholeness. Our third annual summit launches next Tuesday, and I'm so excited to share these sessions with you. Today, I'm going to give you a sneak preview of what you can expect, including some clips from a few different sessions. Don't forget to register so you get all of these sessions at brokentobeloved.org/summit. The first clip I want to share is from my session with Adam Young. Adam is a therapist and host of the very popular The Place We Find Ourselves podcast, and he has a strong focus on story work. I loved my conversation with him as we discussed the impact of investigating our own past stories to find freedom in the present. Here's the clip. You say that often kind of the deepest places of shame can also be our biggest moments of freedom, or the kind of the pathway through those moments to find freedom. Tell us about that, because that was intriguing to me.
Sure. Well, the nature of shame is that a story cannot be told publicly. The nature of shame is that if I told you what happened to me, you would not want to be in relationship with me any longer. So shame is essentially a social experience. It is about my relationship with you. It is about, if you know this about me, will you welcome me and will you want to be in relationship with me, or will you turn your face and your body away from me in exclusion? That's the pernicious experience of shame. It is being turned away from, excluded, because there's something about me that is unbearable and unlovely. So none of us are inclined to enter our stories of shame and tell them to ourselves, much less tell them to another person. The dilemma with that is what I started with. A story that is untold is a story that has you bound in shame. And the way out of shame is by exposing the truth of the story to the light. However, you need to be very judicious with who is worthy of hearing your stories of shame. This is not for public consumption. It's not for the public to know. It's for a few trained wise guides who have done their own work and who have not gifting, but character. Those are the people that are worthy of hearing one or two of your stories. And the only way to start is by sharing one with someone or someones that you feel like have earned the right, by the way they have chosen to live their life, to hear one of the most painful places of shame in your heart. Once you can risk that, then it's, what's this experience like for you, sharing this story? How is the other person taking you in? What are they doing with that 12-year-old girl? What are they doing with that 15-year-old boy? How are they engaging you? And what's that like for your body to be in their presence?
Yeah. And say more about that, because so much of the storytelling feels like a very intellectual and emotional exercise in remembering it, writing it down, kind of mining the feelings that were in that moment, or remembering the, like you're saying, the particularities of it. So then the what you're saying about engaging and all of these things are being in your body. Tell us more about that.
Well, to be in your body is simply to feel your feelings as you are telling the story of the 12-year-old girl. So if you have a history, for example, of sexual abuse that happened between the ages of 12 and 15, it was with your grandfather, it was over the summer. To step into one of those incidents and to tell the story on the ground level with details, in other words, where it happened, how he moved you into a place of, we could say, trust, and not only trust, but wanting to be in the goodness of his presence, because all abusers groom their victims. And the way they groom them is with goodness, with kindness, with a taste of the love of God. And so to tell the story is to tell about what that looked like for you when you were 13 years old, the summer of your 8th grade year, at your grandfather's house for that 2-week vacation. And to tell it with details. When you do that, you will find that you are automatically thrust into your body, feeling a lot of the feelings that you felt when you were 13. And if you can do that with a trained, wise, caring guide, whether that's a trained therapist, a friend, a coach, I could care less what their credentials are. I'm interested in their character and if they've done their own work. Mm-hmm. And if they have, then that person's reaction to hearing your story is going to affect your nervous system. It will provide, hopefully, some regulation for those places where you get terrified or enraged or feel deep shame. To regulate a dysregulated body is a gift. It's the gift of presence. It's the gift of containment. It's the gift of kindness. And now it is not merely that I am telling you my story. It is far more that together we are arriving at a more truthful telling of what happened that day.
Yeah. Yeah. To regulate a dysregulated body is a gift.
Yes.
I love that.
And it is one of the most important gifts that primary caregivers give to their children, hopefully, if you grew up in a loving, caring home. The best, and by best I mean the most neurobiologically significant gift that a caregiver gives to a child is regulation of their dysregulated body. In other words, when you're a toddler, when you're an infant, when you're 12 years old, your body gets anxious, it gets afraid, it gets sad, it gets listless, it gets shut down. We go through shifts in affect all the time. And we need, as children, adults that can help regulate us when we're dysregulated, because we don't have the necessary brain structures to self-regulate yet.
Yeah. And so, correct me if I'm wrong, that's the gift of that attunement, right?
Yes.
Of coming into the world looking for someone, looking for us, that would lead to a secure attachment.
That's it.
It's so beautiful. And yet it's so, I don't want to say rare, but it feels rare for people in these communities, right? So what do we do with those stories? And we try to tell them to someone who is worthy, who can attune to us as we tell that story in order to offer that gift of regulation. And then there are two options, right? They receive it well, they offer that attunement and regulation, or they reject it, or they gaslight us, or whatever it is, and then we feel further pushed into our shame.
Yes, that's right.
What happens then?
What happens when your story is not received well? Well, first of all, may it be when you tell your story, you need to have enough honor for the boy or girl in that story that you do not let the process continue going on if you don't, in Dan Siegel's words, feel felt. If you're not attuned to, if the other person is not with you in the story, then you just stop and realize this was a mistake. This person is not able to hear my story. And I have enough honor for the boy or the girl in the story to stop giving them access. And that's okay. That's just, hey, you didn't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that will be really empowering for a lot of people who hear that, who are used to fawning or used to white knuckling their way through or used to trying harder through things. To say, I am allowed to stop telling my story. I don't owe it to anybody, right? Especially to someone I don't feel safe with. I can't wait for you to hear the rest of that. Next, we'll hear from Jenai Auman. This is her third time speaking at our summit, and she's been a favorite speaker and good friend. It's been so fun to watch the history and progression over the last 3 years, and here's a clip from this year's session.
And I had a hard relationship with her on the church staff. I will also say the church staff was toxic, so we were trying to work within a toxic relationship. And I remember thinking, you're being hard on me right now, but you're also being really hard on you right now.
Yeah. Yep.
And so things like the Enneagram give you language, and that's like my whole thing, is giving people language so that they can name the things that are fractured or what's wrong or what's off or what's different. And it gave me language so that I could be empathetic to someone who was being really, really hard on me. It's also giving me language. So whenever I name the insecurity in my pastor, he didn't know who he was.
Yeah.
And while that doesn't absolve him from all the harm that he did, it makes me see him as human.
Yes.
And it means that I will not dehumanize him in the ways that he's dehumanized me.
Yes.
And so in acknowledging his insecurity, in acknowledging that internal family systems would say that there is an inner child that just never healed and that there are parts of you trying to protect, I see that in the people that harmed me the most. There are these inner child, that this fear, and I think so much of it is fear-based, or our lack of identity, or our whole, we have no identity because we've run from a lot, like our fears. You can't really, to do identity work, to do boundary work, you have to have a sense of curiosity, and you can't be curious when you're constantly surviving or in survival mode. When you're in fight or flight, if someone's about to punch you, you don't have time to think about, like, you know, why is he punching me? Why is the world the way that it is? You just have to dodge out of the way. You know what I mean? And so I speak specifically to identity, and not that I have a prescription for anyone, but begin to be curious about who you are. What makes you tick? What are your fears? One thing that I learned from the Enneagram in particular, and I'm more fluent in the Enneagram than anything else, but if there's another framework that works for you, please pursue that. I learned that I have a really heavy dose of fear toward being abandoned. And so because I didn't want to be abandoned, I would cross my own boundaries often. I would lose my sense of self so that I would kind of fit into the mold of whatever they needed me to be, just so that I wouldn't be left behind. And so my own identity work meant, what do I need to do to help heal this particular insecurity? In my fear of being abandoned, what ended up happening is I abandoned and betrayed myself over and over and over again. And that fractures your sense of identity more than anything else. But your identity is actually rooted, I always go back to Genesis, your identity is rooted in being very good. You were wanted. Everyone on this world is wanted. So if you struggle with being wanted, I want you to know you are wanted. If not by anyone else in your life, there are people in the world who want you here. And that's kind of the work of spiritual direction, is reminding yourself that in spiritual direction, there's you, the spiritual director, and technically there should be a third chair that's supposed to represent God. God wants you there also. And so what do you like about yourself? Do you even like yourself? Do you even know what it means? If you can't befriend yourself, how can you befriend other people? How can you truly love your neighbor as yourself if you think that you only deserve to be walked all over? And I think for people who are abuse and trauma survivors, abuse and trauma break down the sense of self. You are nothing. You are no one. What's yours is technically someone else's. They exploit you. They use you. They hoard your resources, which is why the substance and mental, or just the SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, one of their tenets of trauma-informed care is empowerment. So kind of going back to the idea of, it's not that we are without power. Everyone has power. It's about re-empowering somebody so that they remember that they have voice and choice, because they've been so conditioned to believe what's theirs isn't really theirs anymore. But I love the whole shift toward embodied spirituality that I think many of us are kind of experiencing just in the general Christian cultural moment, because it brings us back to a sense of incarnate being. Like if our bodies didn't matter, then why did Jesus come into the world in a body and he was with us? And so anyway, the sense of identity, and I'm going to speak particularly kind of just juxtaposed to how we holistically, briefly, but our identity has a lot to do with our self-esteem. Self-esteem is, do I like myself? Do I not like myself? I do like myself. Are there ways that I need to grow? Yes, but I like I like that I like to learn. I like that I like to be challenged. I like that whenever I encounter discomfort, I've given myself space to heal such that I can actually name, is this discomfort a lack of safety? Meaning, are the people that are around me, is my environment unsafe? Or is this discomfort an invitation to grow? Because often, when you are in survival or even for I would say for my former pastor, there were a lot of discomforting moments on our church staff that I think he perceived as a lack of safety, meaning we were ready to attack him when really it was an invitation for him to grow. And I said that with him. I don't want you to just figure this out all by yourself. I'm actually telling you that I'm willing to walk with you in it. Which is bananas because women can't be pastors in my former church. And the fact that I was pastoring him this much was just, it was just bananas. But like this idea that like discomfort can be good challenge. And I don't perfectly name my safety or my opportunities to grow every time, but I'm getting better. And so I'm getting better at that because I know who I am. You can't have boundaries. You can't have effective boundaries if you don't know who you are. Like, if you don't know who you are, if you don't know what is it's so funny. I had there have been language that I've found in other folks where the language of boundaries has been leveraged to abuse other people. Like, this is my boundary, and because this is my boundary, I need you to do this. And that's not boundary work at all. Boundary work is an inside game. Yeah. So boundary work is acknowledging this is what I'm responsible for. And this is what I'm not responsible for. I do not carry this for someone else. You can't have effective relationships, or you can still have relationships, but you're going to experience fractured relationships when you don't know who you are. Yeah. Or if you, and this may resonate with a lot of folks, if you become somebody different in different spaces to keep the people in power happy. That is not at all something God. There's a scripture that Paul says, I become all things to all people. I don't think that means losing your sense of self. It means like meeting people with where they're at, and you can still bring your authentic self to where people are at. But maybe because of their own story that they lived, you can't discuss politics with this person, or you can't discuss something else with this person. You just you're meeting people with where they're at. You're not becoming something totally different. Obviously, Paul was writing, this different cultural moment. There's things that are lost in translation, but I don't think that he's advocating that you lose entirely who you are, that you lose your sense of calling, or like Paul never lost his sense of calling to meet people with where they're at. So I think that is the work of boundaries, responsibilities. And whenever you meet all of those things, you can belong. Like when you embody who you are, when you're allowed to show up with who you are, when you are free to share, these are my responsibilities, this is my work and my calling, and people acknowledge that even though it's different, only then can you really start building a sense of belonging.
Okay. I've been a longtime fan of Dr. Curt Thompson, and I'm incredibly grateful for his voice and his work. In our conversation, we talk about healing through connection and community. Here's a clip. Because I think so often we experience this suffering, especially after trauma of, I can't believe I did that again. I can't believe I stayed. Why did I stay so long? Why didn't I respond with? It's like, well, of course you did this or that because you were trying to survive, because you're doing these things. Mm-hmm. And so recognizing the additional work and approaching it with that grace and compassion for ourselves and wanting to co-create those spaces of beauty with others to find some way into community, even if it's just walking in with our bodies into a new space, to risk that thing and to hope that someone will sit with us on the deck and to be with us in it. I think, those are beautiful things and hard things.
And you're mentioning shame and Allison's language around that. We talk about toxic ruptures, but the hallmark of toxic ruptures is the way that shame mobilizes around them. Mm-hmm. And we sometimes think about toxic ruptures and think about large catastrophic events, when in fact they could just be common everyday events that happen in your kitchen over and over and over and over and over again, that nobody would ever be calling anybody about child abuse, about this. They can be very, very, very small things, right? But they are, as we like to say, shame most powerfully and most frequently works through the death of 1,000 cuts. It's these moments of, it's the glance, it's the tone of voice, it's the this, it's the that, these kinds of things that happen in our homes or in our workplaces, in our churches, so forth. And the thing about it is that, this is the thing that evil wields. I mean, this is the beautiful, one of the many beautiful things about the first, 11, 12 chapters of Genesis. Shame shows up early and often. It shows up very, very early, and so subtly, in fact, that we sometimes fail to see that it shows up before the fruit gets eaten. In the dialogue, it's already beginning. And so hence the warning at the end of chapter 2, the man and his wife were naked and unashamed, right? It's a hyperlink. It ring, like a signal to us. And so shame is part of the trauma. But in the journey out and away from the trauma, shame will also be waiting for us at every turn. Anything that we're trying to do, moving toward health and healing, evil is going to want to countermand that at every turn. And so this notion of shame, once it finds a foothold in the trauma itself, it does so and wants to spread itself out and deepen itself and entangle itself with our memory and then our anticipated future. And so this is something else, practically speaking, concretely speaking, about what do we do? And that is for our listeners to be, on a regular basis, keeping an inventory of where and how shame has been part of what I sense, image, feel, think, or what I want to do with my body in the last hour. When in The Soul of Shame, we write about, doing a shame inventory, that you get out a 3x5 card and you just basically, you keep track of the number of times that shame shows up. It's not an attempt to keep a shame log and therefore at the end of the day feel ashamed of all the shame that you've entertained. Yeah. The point is to become increasingly aware of its presence. The point is to do what Peter urges us in the 5th chapter of his first letter, to be vigilant about evil's presence, about where it is roaming around, wanting to take on the devouring element of us, and doing so by these very, very small moments of things like, why did I do this for that long? I should have done this. I should have done that. Mm-hmm. Paying attention to those moments gives us an opportunity then to learn to pause and distance ourselves from the shame in order for then to turn our attention to what is it that I'm actually longing for here. Mm-hmm. Rather than the whole list of condemnations that I could be providing myself to feast on, and which evil is counting on me doing so.
Yeah. That's incredibly helpful. Thank you. That was going to be one of my questions, because you write that we're often unable to bear the image of God as co-creators when we're managing our shame. Yeah. So having that shame inventory, just writing down, and there's so much work that I'm recognizing around just the awareness of what's happening internally.
Oh, dude.
And then once we do the noticing, to give it a name, right?
Yeah, right. That's right. And these are, and here's the other thing. The moment that we're doing this, and this is the beautiful thing. Like, evil doesn't want to use shame just to make us feel bad. It wants to wield it in order to devour us, because it wants to prevent us from creating beauty and goodness in the world. This is the thing. We are made to become artifacts of beauty. We are made to create beauty. That's what it can't tolerate.
And finally, Kayleigh Clark has become a good friend to us and led a breakout session recently at our conference in September. For the summit, we talk about pursuing forgiveness without abandoning justice. She does a lot of work not just around spiritual abuse on individuals, but specifically around congregational trauma, which is just so important. Here's a clip.
Trauma is complex. We need to know that. And then we also need to know that when trauma is caused by clergy, there is some unique challenges and harm that's done that we as pastors who are feeling called to step into this space of healing need to be aware of. And so again, just brief overview. But what I really want to do is I want to spend a lot of time in the practical, because the question is, how do we engage in this conversation? How do we step into these places of healing, especially when we're aware that so many have misused this role that God has given them to cause so much harm? Sometimes it can be scary then to step in because we don't want to cause more harm, right? And so what does it look like for us as pastors to engage in being safe places and creating safe churches? So the first thing I want to talk about is what it means to be a safe pastor, right? So the first thing goes back to what I just shared. We need to understand our role. We need to understand the power, and I know people don't like that word either. And pastors we want to push against, but we don't want power, and that's good, but we have to understand that there are power dynamics at play, and it's actually more dangerous when we don't understand those things. It's actually more dangerous when we pretend they're not there. And so Diane Langberg's book on redeeming power is something every pastor should read, and something we all need to understand, in that when we have power and authority, we have to know how to steward it well and how to have power with instead of power over. We need to understand all of these things and break them all down and be very aware of what our actions are how they're going to influence the people who we are called to serve. And yes, we want to lean into shepherding language, right? I actually don't use leadership language very often in the work that we do. We use a lot of shepherding language. And so what does it mean to shepherd God's people? And so we want to begin to understand those things so that we can know what our actions are going to do to those attachment bonds that people have in our congregation. So one way to be a safe pastor is to understand power, understand the power that we have, and then understand how to use it well, understand how to shepherd people well, and to recognize that there are cautions, right? There are risks in this pastoring thing, and we want to be really careful about those. The other thing that has to come into play when we're talking about being a safe pastor is we have to recognize the signs of abuse or manipulative leadership in ourselves. And so I love Chuck DeGroat's book, When Narcissism Comes to Church, in part because he's really trying to convince us all that this is in all of us, right? And so he has a quote in there where he says, we're all susceptible to narcissistic behavior. There are nights we all feel superior, right? And I think the temptation and the danger, again, is to think we can't fall into these behaviors, is to listen to podcasts like The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill and say, oh, I would never do that. I would never sound like that. I would never preach like that. I would never say those things. And when we can't really stop and look within ourselves and go, oh, in that conversation, I chose to act manipulatively to protect myself. If we can't identify when we're doing those things, or if we can't look at a conversation and go, oh, yeah, that person called me out and it didn't feel right. And so instead of recognizing that I was in the wrong, I chose to gaslight them and I chose to put the problem back on them. If we can't step back and see those things and apologize for those things and seek forgiveness for those things and seek to stop those things and invite people in who can say to us, hey, I came to you about a problem and you dismissed it or you minimized it. If we don't have those people around us, if we're not willing to do that introspective work, we will become very dangerous pastors very quickly. And so we need to be in places where we can do the difficult work of asking ourselves, what are the moments that tempt me to shepherd in ways that are harmful? What are the moments in my ministry that tempt me to neglect the sheep? When am I tempted to seek organizational success over relational health? And we have to be able to identify those things often, regularly. We need to surround ourselves not just with yes men, yes women, but we need to surround ourselves with people who can speak those hard truths to us, who can say to us, hey, I think that maybe you manipulated that a little bit. I think when you told that story, you spun it in a way that made yourself look a little bit better. These are things that we're all culpable of, and we need to be honest about that. And then we need to seek healing for that. The other thing that we can do to be safe pastors is that we can seek healing for our own trauma. And so one thing that pastors need to be aware of, that can become dangerous and can wound the pastor and then wound the congregation or the people they're leading is secondary traumatic stress, which is very, very common amongst pastors. In fact, clergy are at the highest risk of it amongst caring professionals. And part of the reason why is that clergy don't know it's a thing. We don't get training on this. The other reason why is that clergy are wearing way too many hats, right? And so pastors are first responders, and pastors are, they're the ones that are going to do the funeral, but they're also the ones that are going to be at the bedside when the person's passing away. And so there's just way too much going on for a pastor often. And so being aware of our own warning signs of secondary traumatic stress, being in therapy, every pastor should have a therapist, just to do that deep, hard work and to help walk you through your own experiences of trauma, both in your personal life, but then also that trauma that you're carrying vicariously for your congregation, because it's heavy work. And so we want to be cautious of those things. The other way that you can be a safe pastor is that you can choose to be a listener, and you can choose to do ministry from a posture of compassionate curiosity. And so what I love about Jesus is that when he's interacting with people who need healing, he's so often doing so out of a posture of compassionate curiosity, where he asks the blind man, "What do you want me to do for you?" Where he asks the crowd, "Hey, who touched me?" to call out the woman who touched his hem so that she had a place to share her story, that nobody else was giving her a place to share. Jesus asks these questions of people. He does not presuppose what they need to be healed. He doesn't come to them with an agenda or a plan of healing, and these are the 5 steps I'm going to walk you through. But he comes to them with curiosity and love, and he asks them, "What do you want me to do for you?" And in that, he returns to them the autonomy that has been stolen from them. And trauma takes the control and autonomy away from people, especially when we're talking about abuse, because abuse is always connected to control. And so as pastors, it can be really tempting to approach people who have been hurt and who have been wounded and want to tell them we know exactly how they should be fixed, to tell them that we have a plan and a process. But one of the ways to be a safe pastor is to speak less and to listen more, and is to show up with compassionate curiosity that invites a person to decide what it is they're looking for, what it is they need, and gives them a space to share their story in whatever way is going to be most healing to them. And I think that this is a part of pastoral ministry that we have lost sometimes, because we feel like we need to have the words. But often what we need to have is the presence of Jesus that might not have words. And so when we're considering being a safe pastor, let's listen more. And let's do some really good introspection into ourselves and know when we might be at danger of becoming harmful. And let us not forget that we do have power, that we need to surrender to the Holy Spirit and let him show us how to use it so that we don't cause more harm.
I can't wait for you to hear these full sessions, as well as all of our other amazing speakers. When you register, you'll get an email each day with a link to 3 or 4 sessions a day with 36 hours to watch them. You'll hear from author and Bible teacher Kate Boyd, therapist and author Chuck DeGroat, disability advocate Christopher Stewart, attorney Robert Callahan, relationship coach Mary B. Seyfried, emotions coach Becky Castle Miller, and so many more. We'll cover topics like internal family systems, finding community and family again after leaving high control cultures, navigating abuse in faith spaces, creating cultures of protection, and how unresolved trauma impacts us, our faith, our relationships, and lots more. During the week of the summit, I'll be hosting some live bonus sessions on healthy sexuality after purity culture with authors and therapists Dr. Camden Morganti and Sam Jolman. Maybe recording a live podcast and conversation with Amy Fritz, host of the Untangled Faith podcast. and providing an update on the Spiritually Abusive Leadership and Climate Survey, which so many of you took with organizational psychologist Liana Chong. We'll also be getting together for some live community calls so you don't feel like you're so alone attending a virtual summit. And you get all of this for free. Just head to brokentobeloved.org/summit to register and get your free ticket. If you're feeling overwhelmed or you don't think you'll have time to watch all the sessions, you can always get an all-access pass. You'll get access to the full library of sessions instead of just 3 or 4 a day, and you'll get them a full 24 hours ahead of the summit launch, along with bonus resources, session transcripts, and lifetime access to the recordings. Early bird pricing ends January 14th, which is today if it's release day at midnight Eastern Time, so be sure to get that price before it goes up to full price. Finally, if you're looking for a community and place to process your church harm, spiritual abuse, or religious trauma, I want to invite you to join us for the Through cohort. Applications will open next week during the summit, and you can join us for 8 weeks as I guide you through really practical ways to name and share what happened in your story, navigate your liminal spaces, and find practical tools to regulate your nervous system and rediscover and reclaim your belovedness. We've had over 80 people go through the cohort so far over the last 2 years. We've given over $9,000 away in scholarships for it, and you can join the waitlist today at brokentobeloved.org/through. Thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to listen. I hope it's been helpful. Here's to moving toward healing and wholeness together. I'll see you next time.